So I would like to welcome Kristen and Amy as our speakers right now. Really looking forward to your presentation, and I'll let you take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Woodward, and I am the Teaching and Learning Team Librarian at UW-Milwaukee Libraries. And I'm here with my colleague, Amy, this morning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Mangridge. I'm from the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at UW-Milwaukee.
Amy and I have been working together on our open textbook project at UWM for about 6 years now in total. And do you want to go forward on the slide there, Amy?
I would love to. Hang on one hang on one second. It does not look like it's actually moving forward for me. Hang tight.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. So Amy and I would like to share a conversation this morning about the process that we've gone through in building an open textbook and open educational resource project at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We're thinking about this in sort of 4 phases, each of them with different ways of building equity into the selection process for textbooks, sort of early on using our savings and awareness model as an inroad to thinking about student experience and accessibility and cost. But then as we are continuing to struggle with bringing that project to scale, that raises several questions for us about how we can continue the work that we're doing and really focus on what's at stake for students. So at this point, we're in kind of a unique situation where we have an opportunity to start building some structural scaffolding and policy for OER on our campus in the form of a textbook selection workflow. And then we also have a few observations on what's on the horizon. So we'd like to talk about all of those today. And as I said, have a bit of a discussion so that we can share what our process has been and what we see as sort of the outlook at this point for continuing that goal of building equity and sort of soundness in the curriculum through open ed. Oh, you're muted, Amy. Poor thing.
Thank you. I could get the slides going, but I can't get my microphone going.
Not
right
at the same time.
Right. So yes, we're excited to be here today, and so thank you for having us. And we're excited to present some of this material for you. So I want to talk a little bit of a context about UWM, and talk a little bit about UWM. Oops, my apologies. It looks like I'm getting muted here. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the unique qualities of UWM's campus and mission. So UWM is located in Milwaukee, and so a large urban institution. We've always had an access mission. So we've always had part of our mission has always been to reach into southeastern Wisconsin and attract and retain students from that area. In recent years, in the last couple of years, that mission has really been sort of formalized in our 2030 plan, which is a chancellor's initiative where we have formulated 8 goals, and they're all around access and retention of students, and but also continuing our research focus as a research institution. So we do, I think a lot of campuses do, but we do struggle with retaining our students. We have students, we have a high percentage of students who are coming in a little underprepared. We also have a high number of students who are Pell eligible students. So in 2021, 61% of our students were Pell eligible. And so that sort of all combines, all these factors sort of combine to show us, and our surveys have shown us that students report that they're not purchasing their textbooks. So about 78% of our students tell us that they have either delayed purchasing their textbooks, and then 54% are telling us that they have not purchased textbooks at all. So that's an incredibly high number, and we have been struggling with that as an institution. But part of the mission of the Open Textbook Initiative that Kristen and I are involved in is to really address that at a very deep level, and to try to really have an impact on those numbers and on access for our students.
Yeah, and I think that to give a little bit more background on our program, some of the ways that we try to be intentional about recommending and teaching OER as an option to our campus community, especially our faculty, through our outreach projects that we've done over the last couple of years, have really been aimed at sort of showing how that lack of access to course materials broadly, and for shorthand, the textbook, has an impact on students, especially with that access mission. So for example, if we offer more online courses so that students have the flexibility to attend on their own schedule, but they're not purchasing the textbooks that they need for the kind of independent learning that's required in a lot of online courses or even hybrid course models, we would need to really look at that as a campus. And that was one of our initial appeals, was to show sort of how UWM's unique approach to access through additional online learning opportunities and leadership for online learning in Wisconsin, that we really needed to look at the role of those course materials. So we reached out to our student government to look for support from them through the educational technology fees that they distribute on our campus for special projects. And we've successfully received grants for 6 years to push forward this project. We have about 16 adoptions. We're kind of holding steady in that range, but some of our adoptions are in very high impact courses, like the Psychology 101 course that has a high enrollment and really is required in different majors and different pathways in our general education program. And to date, we've reached the milestone of 23,000 students impacted by the project, with a savings of about $2 million. We're always careful to be sure that we subtract the funds that we've received from student government and the ed tech fees, so that we're not sort of double dipping with student savings and student fees that they've already paid, but rather trying to be good stewards of that funding that they've put our way. To brag a little bit on ourselves, our proposal is typically ranked the highest among students, giving it that sort of good feedback from the committee that this is a project that they want to see continue on campus. In addition, we've also had the support from students in that the student government initiated a resolution through student government called the Student Association, and then they pushed that forward through the faculty governance to endorse continued growth of our program. With this emphasis on savings in this slide, however, I want to emphasize that our approach has been slow and deliberate, and that our process for awarding stipends to faculty as recognition for the labor that they would put in for revising their courses as they choose open educational resources has been somewhat rigorous for the faculty. They work with Amy and me in partnership, so getting that support from the library to be aware of the sources, to select the sources, to understand how open licensing will allow them to use the materials, but then meeting with Amy and learning about how they can use the sources more strategically in their classes and think about how their courses and learning, not their courses, their materials and their learning outcomes really align to support student success. And that's really been key for us, and I would say has really been the emphasis more than finding one-to-one textbook replacements for the purpose of driving up savings and adoption. We're really trying to see this holistically as a way to improve the curriculum at the same time. Go ahead, Amy.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks. I was trying to test to make sure that it would go forward. Yeah, so along those lines, you know, as Krista mentioned, we have had great success with funding this project for the last 6 years. I think this is in part to the environment that students find themselves in. We've got a couple of quotes here that I think are good representatives of the environment that our students are in, the situation our students are in. So, you know, these are a couple nice quotes. I could read ahead in car rides or while walking to campus. I could get a refresher on my phone without having to pull out my book. I don't see any downfalls with open text. If anyone wants to highlight anything, they could I could write on my own document as a summary, or I could print it out the pages. And as a poor college student working 2 jobs, I dislike having to pay an extra $100 to use the textbook for 4 months before having to return it to get no money back. It was very easy to read along long commutes to school, and I highly recommend keeping the online textbook option. So I think this is indicative of a couple of things that our students are facing. I don't think our students are unique, but I do think that UWM students, this may be a little more acute for them. We find that our students are very often working students, even students
About
who
30
are
hours a week, right?
Yeah, even students who are full-time students, they're still working students. We find that we have students who acknowledge needing to decide between purchasing, you know, food or very other important essentials, or buying their textbooks. I think we have this in combination with the fact that some students find that if the textbooks aren't used in a very deep way in the course, so they don't see a direct alignment between what's being covered in the textbook and what is being required of them in terms of their assessments, that they don't purchase the textbook. And they learn that very quickly, whether or not they need to purchase the textbook, we all know they need to, but they're balancing a lot of things financially speaking. So yes, I think this is, pretty indicative of the environment that our students are in, and sort of is one of the big reasons why I think the educational technology fee is something that is frequently, they rank us very high in that evaluation process.
Right.
So a little bit more about that. UWM has a fee that is charged to students. That money goes into a big pot. It's called the educational technology fee and funding. We propose every year to receive funding for our open textbook projects, which includes stipends and other sorts of needs associated with the project. And those are evaluated by a group of committee members that include faculty, staff, and students.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as Krista mentioned, this is a very high in our, we usually rank very high in that, procurement process. So as Krista mentioned, we've sort of gone through a number of stages in our project.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, we were providing stipends to review textbooks, open textbooks. We shifted into providing stipends for instructors to adopt a textbook, and sort of this sort of replacement kind of idea. And then very soon after that, though, we shifted into helping instructors consider how they would redesign their courses to incorporate those open resources or open textbooks. Very soon after that, we really realized that, as Kristen mentioned, it's slow and deliberate, but we realized that in this slow and deliberate process, we needed to dive deep into the institution. And so we started to provide these larger stipends for instructors to design across, hang on one second, I'm getting, to design across sections. And so that's been our goal for quite a long time, is to have instructors adopt across multiple sections. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
I think that to kind of just to comment on what you're saying, Amy, that the start of things was really about building awareness, right? Like just kind of getting the word out. And then once we had a couple of sort of samples and we had tested the waters a little bit, we really started to push more for the curricular focus. And we also kind of got the feedback that that was the only way it made sense, like with psychology, because they were working with so many different adjuncts. And the model that they were working with was, here's this class that everyone has to take for certain majors, very popular gen ed course, a difficult gen ed course. But there was sort of one course coordinator, I think, and that individual chose the textbook. And then there were 6 or 7 different faculty or TAs producing slides and quizzes and all of that kind of course content, rather than putting their heads together and saying, how do we make this more uniform? How do we make the experience more uniform? So really that opportunity to look at the textbook together and benefit from some of the resources that were in the OER repositories out there, like slides that were available for ancillary materials. They spent their time adapting that for this whole 1,000 student sometimes 1,600 student section or course per semester, with multiple sections, and really try to build the best version of the course that they could.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the TA, the discussion section development that they had?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, this is one of those. This is really one of the big. Hang tight here. One of the big projects that we've had in the Open Textbook Initiative is the psychology course. And as Krista mentioned, this is a very, very large course. There are many, many instructors. Some of them are adjuncts, and they are teaching the lecture materials. But then there are discussion sections, and in those discussion sections, what the instructors were reporting back, and the TAs were also reporting back, is that they were having trouble aligning what was happening in the discussion section with the lecture and across the discussion sections. So one discussion section, for example, could be quite rigorous, and the other discussion section would be, a little bit less rigorous. And so the consistency across those sections and in alignment with the lecture was challenging. And so what this group that proposed and completed this project did is they developed a curriculum for the discussion sections, because they were able to identify the goals and objectives, the structure, the topics, and even the assessments in the lecture. They were able to then very easily align week by week what was going on in the lecture with what should be happening in the discussions. And so there was development of discussion questions. There was development of grading schemes and rubrics. So that ended up being very successful. And that was sort of a big chunk of our project a couple of years ago.
And I think that became a model for us, because we saw a lot of opportunity for revising for equity in that model. Not only removing the barrier of purchasing the textbook for a difficult course that really required having those readings available day one, but also the really systematic look at how section by section student experience might vary versus having a consistent student experience with consistent transparent expectations. And a lot of transparency for how to train new teachers in that teaching assistant role. So that's kind of the ideal.
Yeah, I think the outcome from that was that this is difficult to prove, but the anecdotal evidence suggests that the students were more successful in the process because of this alignment, because of this transparency. And so, yes, I agree, Kristen, completely that from an equity lens, this was a big shift forward for us. In terms of finding ways to have open resources be not just equitable from a financial perspective, but equitable from a teaching and learning perspective, from a retention and grade perspective. Yes, absolutely.
And I think then that kind of takes us to our next point of discussion, which is that in this model where we're not really working with a top-down directive from our campus to perform open textbook adoption, but rather where it's coming from the library and CETL as a best practice or a high impact practice for increasing retention, improving grades, and really working from what we've learned from all of the great studies that are out there on the impact of open textbook and course revisions. We're still, with all of that and with all the years that we have in, kind of at a point of frustration and growing pains, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the issue is that for a campus of our size with thousands of courses and a very large array of general education options for students, 16 adoptions just doesn't look like enough to kind of prove the concept as an ideal project to move forward. So as planning is taking place on our campus, we're in the list of good things to do, but not necessarily in the let's figure out how to help Amy and Kristen scale this project up so that we can see the benefits across all areas of instruction on campus.
Mm-hmm.
But that has another downside, which is it means that we have to continue being careful about how much we take on or how many projects we can take on or how much we can do in terms of marketing the program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, Amy? Am I getting that
Yeah.
across?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Okay, if I go forward or?
Sure.
So along those lines, what we started to see, right, as Kristen is saying, it's like we're trying to grow. Yeah, we're trying to grow, but there's not a lot of infrastructure there to help us grow. And so what we did during COVID time, so in 2020 and 2021, is we started to shift. Everybody started to shift. It was COVID. But we started to shift sort of our thinking about the project, about the initiative, and sort of started to shift from it being project by project based to really trying to locate and identify ways for the initiative to be part of the structure of the organization, of the institution. So one of the things that we saw happening during the COVID closures was that we were seeing that there were a lot of instructors who were using open. So Kristen has mentioned a couple of times this 16 adoptions, which doesn't sound like very much. But what we realized is that there are a lot of instructors who are using open, lots and lots, but they don't think of themselves as using open. They don't think of what they're doing as being an open educational resource. So we started to recognize this. I was teaching a lot of workshops that started to talk about open educational resources. Kristen in the library was getting a lot of inquiries about needing resources and needing open resources. And so we were seeing all these things happen, but those factors started to change how we were thinking. And so I think I'm going to move to the next slide because
Sure.
Because we started to shift into, as I mentioned, how do we get this into the structure of the organization? Which one of the things that we wanted to do was to work with the schedule of classes. I'm skipping ahead for Kristen.
I just put a question in the chat to sort of ask if others also experienced that sort of high demand for course content during the shift to online, thinking about that March 2020 to fall 2020 phase where we were trying to figure out how to build online courses very quickly. I just want to kind of give a shout out to Amy that during that time, her unit at UWM was critical to moving thousands of classes online
Thousands.
in a very short period of time. And part of that was leveraging the experience that her unit has in developing faculty competency in online teaching, but doing that at hyperspeed and pace in that time frame. And I think a lot of others in attendance probably experienced something similar. One of the things that we were doing as part of our pilot, but that could help us kind of blow up our project to make it even more impactful and to take into account this sort of new emphasis on affordability and content creation and overall barrier removal for students, both in the COVID era and the initiative that we have going forward on our campus right now with the 2030 plan is the course marking process. So I know there's probably a few people here who have participated in course marking where you leverage the schedule of classes to indicate what the textbook status or requirements are for a course, so that students have the opportunity to select their courses based on additional textbook costs. So since we had a core of adoptions, we wanted to start promoting those in the schedule of classes. And where we worked for about 2 years with our registrar, and we were able to get this off the ground as a pilot where students could select their courses based on the criteria that they were under $25 in course fees. So we wanted to have an open and affordable filter, recognizing that even open classes might require students to spend a little bit of money on copies, or just to be the most transparent that we could about those unforeseen costs that might come with a preference for printing an open textbook or what have you. So you can imagine that when we started to advertise this to advisors, and we tried to get the word out to our administration that this pilot was in place, but there was a lot of interest in it beyond our core group of adopters. And in fact, Amy and I wanted to recognize folks we knew who were just not requiring a textbook, or were using content from the library collection, like we heard about in Mitchell's presentation. So we worked with our registrar. We were pretty careful, and I guess the odd thing about it is that I was the person with the list of classes that could be considered open and affordable. And that's fine for a pilot, but our real goal was to get this into a workflow for our faculty, and to make sure that through the sort of layers of systems that we have in place in each department for setting up the schedule of classes each semester, that part of the information and criteria that would go into that process would be identifying the cost of the textbook for the course, not necessarily the cost of every textbook, because we have that information through the bookstore usually. But what we really wanted to identify was, would this be an open textbook, open and affordable, under $25? And then our students can click a box, and then it filters for them those courses. So right now we have a nice healthy chunk of courses that are showing up as open and affordable, and we really wanted to expand that. But as we started to think about that, we had to kind of do two things. One, we'd already been through the process of kind of reflecting on what we wanted to have included in that list, and opened it up to affordable content, not just openly licensed open ed content. But we also wanted that process available, and we wanted to be able to say this process and this policy come from this place in our administration. And so we struggled a little bit to kind of figure out where that was exactly. Do you want to go ahead, Amy?
You bet.
So the question of, who's responsible for this on our campus has always sort of come back to the two of us. Our units. We've had this sort of funding from the students. We've had the go-ahead from the faculty and principal to work on this project. And, there's really no reason for us not to incorporate this as a best practice. But we have not had kind of that overarching campus initiative for open that we could look to for guidance in questions like this. So in that case, being a state institution, we still have to consider things like shared governance, faculty response, faculty support, administrative support. Because again, if you can imagine, I'm holding the list and saying this is affordable and this isn't. We really need to have that buy-in from other places to do that. So we talked a little bit about a strategic plan that we have on our campus called the 2030 plan. And parts of that are focused on affordability as we strive to create what we're calling a radically welcoming campus. And I mentioned also that OER was a part of that plan, but not in a formal way that we could point to, or that we could form like a working group from. There were other places where it would be discussed and brought in as sort of part of the ecosystem.
It's like, as Krista mentioned earlier, it's like everybody thinks it's a good idea, but they don't really know what to do with it or how to structure it within the organization. And so I think that's the pieces that we're missing. Is like, hey, this is a great idea, but how do we make it happen? And that was sort of missing from the 2030 plan, which leaves it to us to figure out, okay, how do we get that? How do we engage that? How do we make that happen?
Yeah. So one of the things that our open community talks about a lot is the reality of inclusive access as part of the ecosystem. And we really hadn't had a big discussion about inclusive access on our campus, just like we hadn't had like an overall discussion about OER. But we started to see more interest in inclusive access, especially as this sort of broader discussion about affordability was coming through. And we wanted to get the word out about the differences in the equity proposition between open and inclusive. And in doing that, we were able to re-engage with one of the folks who's been a supporter for us, the dean from the Office of Student Success. And so having that conversation led to some new ideas that were also incorporated in our 2030 plan. So it really got us connected and thinking about ways that we'd already discussed, right, Amy? Like we had this emphasis on OER in general education, and the 2030 plan is really looking at our array of gen ed courses and ways to make those easier for students to navigate as part of the course planning and graduation process, and even navigating majors and claiming majors and that kind of thing. And so in communicating with our administration about our interest in being part of those discussions with open and affordable in that realm of gen ed and the radically welcoming campus initiatives, we were able to establish sort of an administrative home with the Office of Student Success. And one of the ideas that they brought to us was looking at open ed as part of the syllabus approval process. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Amy?
Sure. So the goal here is to make as transparent as possible the selection of textbooks. And so as those of us who do faculty development, who work directly with students, one of the things that is a huge takeaway is to manage student expectations. And the better you manage student expectations, the more effective students can be. And so that's part of this. Having transparency in the syllabus about the textbook selection, about what the textbook is, about why it was selected. If it is a commercial textbook, why that commercial textbook is the best textbook that's for this course. If it's open, then what process happened and why open is the best option for this course. So what that required then, if that's part of the transparency that would be in the syllabus, what needs to happen is each individual instructor has to go through the process of determining what their textbook is, why they've selected it, what they've done to attempt to provide affordability, and why this is the best choice for their course. And so when figuring all this out, we realized that we were going to have to formalize our training. So at this point, up to this point, we had hosted an array of different information sessions and, trying to attract the individual instructor to come in and adopt a textbook or adopt an open educational resource, or a course to come in and adopt a resource across many sections. But this really is shifting into a very different situation. This is really about breadth across all of the courses. And even if they're not adopting an open textbook or an open educational resource, they're considering it. They're thinking through the process of what that would be like to have an open textbook. And so in my mind, this is a radical shift in our approach. It really is only possible because of our connections with the 2030 plan and our connections with our administration in very different ways than it has been in the past. So we are working on the development of a training module. In that training module, there are a number of pieces. There's the sort of basic stuff related to what is open, what are open educational resources, what are open textbooks, what's Creative Commons, what's fair use, what's what are copyright considerations, these sorts of things. But I think one of the things that's interesting is we realized that we needed to streamline and formalize the course redesign or course design process and alignment, right? Aligning the open resource with the course itself, with the goals and objectives of the course itself. So we developed sort of a workflow, sort of a process that the instructors could go through. We had them look at their current materials and look at their course structure and determine whether or not they could find an open resource, whether it was an open textbook or a set of open educational resources that had, we were calling it close alignment. If they could find a textbook that had a close alignment with their current structure, meaning it fits almost one-to-one, sort of lockstep. If I've got module 1, it matches with module 1 here. That's a close alignment. If we've got close alignment, great, we're good to go. There's the second part of this, which would be a distant alignment, which means that there's part of the open resource that matches up with the course, but part of it doesn't. And so helping the instructor identify those gaps. Where are there things missing? Where can we locate and incorporate different resources to fill those gaps? Or where would we need to have content created to fill those gaps? And then as a last resort, there's the sort of unavailable. If you can't find anything that fits, then you really have two choices. You're either continuing to keep your commercial textbook, which is fine, but the process that the instructor went through to get to the place where they've said, no, the commercial textbook is the best option here, it gives them the opportunity to then communicate that to the students. This is why I've looked at this. This is why the commercial textbook is the best choice. And I can communicate that effectively in the syllabus and make that transparent for my students. Or if they don't decide, if they can't find anything and they don't decide to continue on with the open text or with the commercial textbook, then there's the opportunity for them to either curate a large group of resources to develop their own, open textbook, so to speak, or to develop that material, to create that material. So the training module itself is really an overview of what open is, and then some activities that really help the instructor figure out how to identify open, and if they can't identify open, how to communicate the fact that they are using a commercial textbook to their students.
So we're planning to distribute that as a Canvas module, since that's the learning management system on our campus. One of the things that we have not done as much with in the past during the sort of early focus on open educational resources was bring in our library partners from Interlibrary Loan and the Media Library and our library collections. And as I mentioned, Mitchell Scott did a nice presentation on looking at library collections for supplemental resources. We've done a little bit of that kind of work at UWM, but really more focusing on the ways that our library is already providing instructional materials. So knowing that paper reserve does not serve the needs of all of the students on our campus, the majority of our students living off campus and having busy work lives and family lives in addition to school. We want to make that as flexible as possible. So we've formed a committee for the first time in the libraries to really look at how library resources can supplement open content with affordable content in our UWM courses. And we want to make the selection workflow part of that training as well, and really integrate the communication we have coming from the different units of the library with the training that we're doing with CETL. In looking ahead, I think maybe we could focus on the open courses, Amy.
Yeah, that sounds great. We're want to be mindful of folks' time. So one of the things that we're finding, as Kristen mentioned, that we're seeing the need to have clear workflows for the identification and selection of open resources, whether those resources are truly open or whether they're part of the library collection. Finding ways to do that that is self-directed, that allows the instructor to be self-directed within a structure or a framework of support. So what we're finding is that there are more and more programs that are moving online, full programs, master's programs, full programs in the undergraduate environment. And in the process of moving online, there is a redesign that occurs where the courses are aligned with the objectives. The content itself is being examined to ensure that whatever is being provided in terms of the content is enough to allow the students to accomplish the goals and to complete those assessments successfully. So that examination of the content is really where this open initiative comes in, and this workflow comes in. When looking at the materials that the program or the course already offers, again, identifying the gaps, where are there places where that material is not covering everything that's needed in order for the students to be successful in those assessments. And where we find those gaps, that's where we're developing this workflow that would help the instructor locate those resources and incorporate those into their classes. And so in the process of doing all of this workflow, locating these resources, adopting these resources, we're really seeing that a lot of the activities that our initiative is doing is less about this individual one-to-one relationship between adopting a new textbook or bringing in open educational resources, but it's really about redesigning courses. And so we really are seeing the future of this as moving toward open courses, and open educational resources are one component of that, a very important component of that, but that the course itself becomes a more open course where even the assessments, the content that's been created, the assessments, the rubrics, etc., all of it becomes an open resource.
Right.
Did you have anything to add, Kristen?
There's always more to talk about with
That's
this
for
topic.
sure.
But thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know Amy is also available.
And I'm happy, I think people can pick up the mic if they would like, or chat. And I know we're running out of time. So I guess I would invite anyone to communicate with us. Our contact information is here. You're welcome to communicate with either one of us or both of us for any other questions or things that you might need.
Mm-hmm.
You bet. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Anita.
Well, while people are thinking of their questions, I just want to say thank you both for the presentation today. And it was a great kickoff to our summit this year. So definitely we'd invite you back to speak again. And it was really great to hear what some other schools are doing. Gives me ideas on what we can do here on our campus too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. Appreciate it.